She wasn't human, but she was my sister. Can you truly love something the world calls a monster? And what if a creature, not human, not explainable, ends up teaching you what an unconditional love really means? That winter, my mother didn't see a strange being. She saw a trembling little girl. She didn't ask where it came from. She just said, "Right now, we're all she has." And from that moment, we became a family, to something no one dared to name. My name is Maybeth, and I'm the only one left who ever called Solace my sister. Today, I'm telling the story my mother wrote down, line by line, in love, not science. You'll discover why a human family kept a secret for 20 years, not out of fear, but out of devotion. You'll witness a love that transcended species, fear, even life itself. And maybe, just maybe, you'll never see the wild the same way again. Solace returned only once, to Skyloft, our treehouse, just to sleep one last time. No wounds, no pain, just her blanket and a second footprint beside her own. My mother whispered, "You made it back, baby." That's all I ever needed. If you believe love must have conditions, hear the story before it's too late. Because some goodbyes don't come twice. I was 6 when a lie entered our kitchen. My brother said it needed help, but Mama saw it needed love. That's how it started, with Ezra stomping in, boots soaked and face red from the wind, cradling a bundle of denim in breathless fear. The storm was still thick outside. Tennessee winter pounding on our windows like it meant to come in. He laid it gently, like a secret he didn't want the cold to steal. On Mama's kitchen table. Clay, our daddy, was the first to speak. "What in God's name is that?" His voice came out clipped, like a snapped twig. Ezra said nothing. He just stared at it. So did I. It didn't move at first. It looked like a heap of mud-soaked laundry, wrapped in his flannel shirt. Then it whimpered, sharp and high. Not animal, not human. Mama stepped forward, slow but certain, wiping her hands on her apron like she was about to handle a newborn in the ER. She peeled back the flannel. There it was, small, barely the size of a toddler, covered in wet matted hair and brambles. The skin beneath was ashy, almost bruised-looking, like it hadn't seen sunlight, maybe ever. Its eyes fluttered open and locked on Mama like it had already decided she belonged to it. Then Mama gasped, not loud, just sharp enough that I looked closer too. The thing had a gash running from beneath its jawline, clean like a seam undone. Not clawed, not torn. Jade split it like something had tried to pull it apart from the throat up and stopped halfway. Like it had escaped from something that wanted it sewn in. Mama didn't flinch. She whispered, "Oh, honey," and reached for a washcloth from the drawer. I remember that towel. It was the one she used on me when I had strep, the one that smelled like cedar and Vicks. She ran it gently along the thing's face, revealing more patches of gray-pink skin, high-set cheekbones, and a mouth too wide to belong to anything that should come from a womb. But then it looked at her again, and Mama smiled like it didn't matter. Clay didn't move from the doorway. His eyes had narrowed to slits. "You don't know what that is, Dar. Could be diseased. Could be wild." Mama never broke her gaze. "It's cold. That's all I need to know right now." Ezra spoke up, voice cracking. "I found her near Foxmire Creek, just lying there like she'd been dropped." Mama didn't ask more. She wrapped the thing in a dry towel, slid a casserole dish into the oven to warm, and told me to get the baby bottles from the old cedar chest. The ones from when I was born. I obeyed without thinking, half terrified, half mesmerized. She sat with the thing, her knees on the linoleum, back against the cabinets, feeding it milk warmed with honey. I sat beside her, stealing glances. Its lips were cracked, teeth small but sharp, and yet it drank like it knew how. I asked if it was a monkey. Mama said nothing, just stroked its damp hair and hummed a lullaby I hadn't heard since my fever winter. Later, when the house quieted and Clay took Ezra to the garage for AA talk, I watched Mama rewrap the creature in a flannel blanket and lay it in the empty laundry basket. She placed it beside the radiator and sat on the floor, notebook in hand. Her nurse's journal. I wasn't supposed to read it. But I did, years later. She'd written, "Vital stable, no sign of fever. Hair density inconsistent. Breathing patterns match neonatal human stress response. Gash under left jaw, older. Scar tissue forming. Possible trauma at birth or detachment." She'd circled that last word, detachment, before bed. I asked her, "Is she staying?" "She's staying." She looked tired, older than usual, but her eyes stayed kind. "She's not ours, baby, but for now, we're all she has." That night I couldn't sleep. I crept down the hall and peeked into the laundry room. The creature, she, was curled tight, fists clenched against her chest, making a soft ticking sound with her throat, a sound like grief in Morse code. Mama had left the door cracked and a lamp on. She must have known I'd look. In the morning, I caught Clay standing over the basket. His arms were crossed, his jaw set. He didn't reach out. He didn't speak to her, just stared long enough to let something curdle in the room. Then he turned away and muttered, "That thing didn't find us. Something left it here. Like a warning." He walked out without waiting for anyone to answer. I stayed behind. The creature opened her eyes. They weren't like mine or Mama's or even Ezra's. They were too dark, too deep, like a forest without light. And still, when she looked at me, I didn't feel afraid. I felt chosen. Once something has a name, you can't pretend it's not real. That was Mama's mistake. Or maybe her miracle. The morning after Ezra brought her in, the snow outside had crusted into thin glass. I watched Mama kneel beside the laundry basket, her hand resting lightly on the creature's rib cage like she was feeling for a heartbeat in church silence. She hadn't slept. I don't think she even blinked much that night. Every time I stirred in bed, I could hear the soft creak of her rocking, the wet click of the bottle, the slow hush of her voice humming something without words. Later, I found a new entry in her journal, scrawled in darker ink like she'd written it in half light. Second feeding, successful. Swallows slowly, as if unsure she's allowed. Eyes track movement, mouth damaged but healing. Facial structure not consistent with any primate I've encountered. Temperature fluctuates with emotional stimuli, unprecedented. That line stuck with me long after. Even then, even before I knew what that meant, I could tell Mama wasn't just treating her like a patient. She was studying her, holding on to every bit of proof this girl, was alive and worth keeping. Not like a pet, like something sacred. Dr. Walt Avery arrived that afternoon. He parked his truck close to the porch, boots crunching through the ice, face pink from the cold. He smelled like tobacco and iodine and wood smoke. When he stepped inside and saw her in the basket, he paused. Not like he was surprised, like he was already preparing for a conversation he wasn't ready to have. "Is that what Ezra called about?" he asked, his eyes flicking from Mama Taku, who stood in the corner like a shadow. Mama nodded. "She's not injured, not really. But there's something wrong and something wrong. I need to know which it is." Dr. Avery approached slowly. I saw the way he looked at her. Clinical, guarded. But then his gaze softened. Just a little. She blinked up at him, mouth parted like she recognized his scent. He pulled on a pair of gloves and reached down, touching her shoulder, her back, then moved his hand to the ridge of her spine. He didn't say a word for a while, just kept tracing along her back like he was reading a map. Nobody else could see. Then suddenly he jerked his hand back like he'd touched a live wire. Hair core temperature. It's changing, rising and falling with her pulse. I've never seen that. Not even in reptiles. He looked at Mama, confused and a little afraid. "That's not human." but it's not anything else either. She's mine, Mama said. Calm. Firm. As if that was the only diagnosis that mattered. Clay scoffed and walked out onto the porch. Ezra followed, shaking his head. Dr. Avery packed up his bag, but before he left, he looked down at her one more time. You sure you want to keep calling it a she? Mama smiled, brushing a strand of wet hair off the creature's brow. Unsure. That night, I sat beside Mama while she fed her again. The girl, because that's what she was to me now, clutched the bottle with fingers too long and knuckled, like bent twigs wrapped in skin. Her breath steamed in the cold. Her eyes never left Mama's face, not once. I asked Mama if she'd picked a name. She hesitated, then said, not yet. But later that night I saw her standing at the foot of the stairs, holding the little one against her chest, whispering to her. I couldn't hear all the words, just one. Solace. She whispered it like a wish, like an apology. From then on, she started writing the name into her journal. Not the girl, not the creature, just Solace. She capitalized it every time. I kept trying to say it in my head without feeling strange. Solace. A soft word. A kind word. But it didn't belong to any baby I'd ever known. It felt heavier, older. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of movement outside. I peeked through the curtain and froze. There was something, standing at the edge of the woods, tall, still. Shoulders hunched, arms long and low like branches swaying without wind. It didn't come closer. It didn't move at all, but it watched. I felt it watching. It didn't feel angry. Just waiting. I wanted to scream. I wanted a Mama, but I stayed frozen, breathing so slow I thought my lungs would stop. When I blinked again, the thing was gone. In the morning, I didn't tell Mama. I only asked, do you think someone's looking for her? She didn't look up from the eggs she was scrambling. If they are, she said, they're already too late. And that was that. Solace stayed. She drank more milk. Her wound began to knit itself into something strange, more like a seam than a scar. Mama wrapped her in my old baby blankets and carried her like she'd carried me. I started to think of her as my sister, even if I never said it aloud. A week later, I found Mama asleep in the rocking chair with Solace on her chest. The house was quiet except for the stove ticking as it cooled. Her journal lay open beside her. I read one line scribbled in the margin. She fits where grief used to sit. I didn't understand it then, but now I think that's what naming is. It's not about ownership. It's about filling the empty places with something that doesn't run when you call. Solace. She didn't come from us, but the second Mama named her, none of us could pretend she hadn't. We didn't raise her to be tame. We just hoped love would be enough to keep her close. By February, Solace was walking on her own, though not quite like us. She didn't toddle or stumble the way I remembered from cousins learning to walk. She moved low, knees bent, spine fluid, like she was gliding through a space only she could see. Her legs grew longer than mine by the time the snow melted. Her toes splayed slightly outward, with a softness underneath, like the pads on a raccoon's feet. Mama started trimming the sleeves off my old clothes, trying to fit them over Solace's frame. But she outgrew them in weeks. The little dresses with strawberries and ribbons sagged at the shoulders, hung like wet cloth. Solace didn't mind. If she had it her way, she'd be bare in the cold and rolling in the garden mud, even when it was still half frozen. She didn't talk, never tried. But she hummed, or maybe it was something else, soft vibrations that changed with mood. Low and slow when she was calm. Sharp, chittering sounds when she got excited, usually when chasing wind-blown leaves or crunching dead wasps under her heel like popcorn. At night, she made clicks with the back of her throat, rhythmic and strange, like she was calling something far away. Mama wrote, "She doesn't want to be contained. I don't think she understands inside versus outside. She's drawn to the wind, to the tree line, to the places where things end and begin. Clay stopped trying to hide the way he tensed when she passed too close. He moved his tools out of the garage and into a locked shed behind the house. When Mama asked why, he just muttered something about safety. Ezra followed his lead. He wouldn't sit near her at dinner, wouldn't even look her in the eyes. One afternoon, I caught him digging in the woods. He said it was for a squirrel trap, but the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, like something might answer a call he hadn't meant to make, made my stomach twist. I, on the other hand, couldn't stay away from her. I started sneaking her shiny buttons from Mama's sewing kit, lining them up on the porch rail to see which she liked best. She always picked the dullest ones, the ones with cracked edges or tarnished metal. She'd roll them in her palms and sometimes hold them up to her nose like she was smelling stories left behind. We played our own games. I'd draw circles in the dirt, she'd trace them with her clawed fingers, then press her forehead to the center, as if she could hear something inside it. She climbed like nothing I'd seen, barefoot, fearless, scrambling up our gutters and perching on the roof like a weather vane. Mama didn't stop her. When Solace bit through her third diaper in a week, Mama gave up trying to civilize her. Instead, she taught her where the water buckets were and how to clean herself using moss and cedar shavings. Solace learned fast. Too fast. Mama started keeping notes by the fire, murmuring half to herself, half to Solace. "You're not slow, baby. You're not slow, baby. You're wild. That's different." The day they built the Skyloft, everything shifted. It was supposed to be my treehouse. Daddy's compromise to keep me away from the barn where Ezra kept his snares in 22. It had a rope ladder, a wooden swing made from a tire, even a second level they hadn't planned but added when the first floor felt too small. They finished it just as the first spring birds came back. I helped Mama hang an old quilt over the entrance for privacy. We placed my teddy bear on the shelf, a plastic lantern, and 2 cans of peaches we'd forgotten to label. But Solace was the first one to climb it. She didn't hesitate. She pulled herself up like a squirrel with arms, slipped inside and curled in the far corner. That night she didn't come down. Not for dinner. Not for Mama's coals. By morning, it wasn't mine anymore. I didn't mind watching her up there, limbs sprawled in the sun, eyes half-lidded like a lion on a ledge. Felt right. Like we'd built her something sacred without knowing we were meant to. Mama left food at the base of the ladder each day. A bottle, a folded blanket, dried berries. Sometimes Solace took them. Sometimes she didn't. One evening the wind was still, so still it made your ears ring. And then it came. Solace climbed to the peak of the roof and let out a sound that bent the air. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a song. It was something in between. Something that vibrated the bark. We stood frozen on the porch, Mama gripping the rail, eyes fixed upward. The sound ended, and the stillness returned. But the next morning, lying on the wooden steps of the loft, was a flower. Not just any flower. A wild bloom, pale and glowing, with petals like stretched paper. Mama bent down and picked it up like it might disintegrate. She looked at the tree line, then back at the loft. She didn't say anything, but that night she wrote, "She's calling, and something is answering." That was when I started recording. I'd snuck Mama's cassette player from the hallway closet and taped it under the loft at night. Mostly, I caught wind. Sometimes the rattle of leaves or an owl's cry. But one night I caught something else, a sound like breathing, then a low trill, then something like a whisper. It didn't sound like words until I slowed the tape down. Then I heard it, not clearly, not loud, but enough. Not loud, but enough. Home, not home. I didn't tell Mama. Not yet. I wasn't sure she'd want to know, because deep down, I think she already did. Underneath the branches of our holler's tallest trees, Solace began to take me farther than I'd ever dared alone. She never led with her hands. She led with her silence, and I followed, even when my boots got caught in brambles, even when Mama's voice was still calling us from the back porch. The first time she touched my hand, it wasn't playful. It wasn't even warm. It was a firm grip, right above the wrist. And she pulled me, not hard, but with a strange kind of urgency, away from the creek and deeper into the woods. I remember glancing back, seeing our roof, barely visible through the pines, and realizing that what I'd always thought was the edge of our world wasn't. We crossed the ridge where no trails ran, and stepped into a hollow I didn't recognize. The sunlight there looked different, filtered, slow. It made the dust float like ghosts. I thought we'd gone in circles, but Solace moved with too much purpose for that. She didn't stumble or pause. She walked like she'd been here before, like every root and stone had already whispered its name to her. Eventually, we reached a clearing no wider than our kitchen, and in the middle stood a flat stone that rose waist-high from the ground, blanketed in moss and centuries of silence. It looked like a table left behind by giants. Solace crouched low, her fingertips brushing the edges. Then she stood back and looked at me. I didn't move. Something about that stone made my legs feel too heavy. I saw the way the moss had grown in a strange pattern, like fingers fanning out, and then I saw it clearly. A handprint. Not small like mine or Mama's. Massive, the kind of hand that could crush bone, frozen in stone like it had been pressed there and left behind, waiting. Solace growled. Not loud, but deep, protective. She stepped between me and the stone, eyes narrowing. I backed up, heart thudding, and she softened. Her head tilted like she was sorry for scaring me, but I could tell. She didn't want me touching it. When we got home, Mama was already on the porch, arms folded, face pale. She didn't yell, just opened the door and said dinner was cold. Later, when Solace climbed up to her loft, and I went to bed, I heard Mama writing. The next morning, I peeked into her journal. Her handwriting was jagged and fast. There's a place she doesn't want us to know. She calls it the edge. I don't think it's the edge of our world. I think it's the edge of hers. Weeks passed, and things shifted. Solace began staying out longer. She'd disappear past dusk and only return at dawn, dirt clinging to her knees, eyes wild and glassy like she'd seen lightning from inside the sky. Mama stopped trying to bring her in. She just waited at the base of the treehouse, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing but a hum in her throat and a blanket over her shoulders. One night, while I was pretending to sleep, I heard Solace humming above me. Her voice had changed, deeper, more layered. I climbed the rungs and peeked in, careful not to be seen. She sat hunched, swaying slightly, holding something in her lap. At first I thought it was a bundle of moss. Then it shifted. It was alive, a small creature, covered in jet black fur, with long fingers and tiny, twitching ears. Not quite a baby. Not quite anything I'd ever seen before. Solace cradled it, brushing its forehead with her knuckles. Her hum shifted into clicks, then silence. Then she kissed the top of its head, clumsy, uncertain, and climbed back down the tree, disappearing into the trees without ever looking back. I waited until she was gone, then crawled into the loft. The scent lingered, earthy, metallic, not quite animal, not quite wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't tell anyone. By the next morning, Solace was different. She sat still at breakfast, something she never did. Her eyes didn't dart, her hands didn't fidget. She was focused, but not on us. Her gaze kept drifting to the woods, like something out there had her attention now, something she didn't want to forget. I started noticing other changes. She stopped climbing the roof. She no longer played with the tire swing. She didn't try to hum back when I whistled. It wasn't sadness. It was distance, like a part of her had already left. Mama saw it too. That afternoon, I saw her standing by the kitchen window, dish towel in hand, unmoving. Solace was in the yard, crouched in the grass, drawing circles with a stick. Mama whispered something to herself, then later wrote in her journal, "She's begun detaching, preparing, like animals do when they sense a storm long before it comes." That night, it rained, but only for an hour. Thunder cracked once, distant and slow. I woke to it, heart pounding. I went to the window and froze. Solace was standing at the tree line, alone. She turned, just slightly, and looked back at the house. Then she raised her arm, not waving, not signaling, just holding it up, like a question. Then she disappeared into the woods. I didn't see her return until morning. She didn't say where she'd gone. She just climbed into the loft and slept for most of the day. That evening, Mama lit a candle at the window. Not for prayer, for waiting. She didn't tell anyone what she saw the next time she followed Solace. But the next journal entry was only 4 words. "She's not alone." And I knew without asking that Solace had led Mama back to the stone. That she had touched something older than memory. Something waiting at the edge of the world. Solace never asked for space. She just grew into it. At first it was subtle. The way she walked upright a little more each week. The way her voice, if you could call it that, shifted into longer, drawn-out tones that held weight in the air, like low bells in fog. Her limbs thickened. Her shoulders broadened. She stopped ducking under door frames. One morning, I woke up and realized she wasn't taller than me anymore. She was taller than Daddy. Clay measured her against the pantry doorframe one afternoon, and when she stood back, I saw him trace the pencil mark an inch above his own height. His lips pressed together tight. Then he stepped back without a word. Later that night, Mama wrote, "We're losing the illusion of smallness. She no longer fits the story we told ourselves. We stopped trying to make her sleep inside." Solace preferred the roof, then the treehouse, then beyond even that. One night, when the wind was dead still, she climbed to the very top of the cedar and let out a sound that shook the dishes in our kitchen cabinets. It wasn't loud, not exactly. It was low, vibrating through the bones. I held my breath. Then, just before dawn, we found a flower by the back step. Not one that grows in our woods. Something purple and coiled like it bloomed only under secrets. Mama didn't ask where it came from. She just picked it up gently, tucked it in a saucer, and whispered, "She's not alone." Ezra started keeping his distance. He was 13, filled with elbows and attitude. But I could tell Solace's presence made him nervous. He wouldn't admit it. But I saw the way he turned away when she brushed too close, how he started locking the shed even though there wasn't anything worth stealing. Clay, on the other hand, became more curious. One weekend, when Mama was at a double shift and I was at Aunt Bertie's, Clay followed Solace into the woods. He thought she didn't know. He told Mama later she moved like fog through the trees, soft-footed but sure, ducking under fallen limbs, brushing moss off stones like checking for memories. He followed her all the way past Widow's Reach, and then he saw it. Another one. 8 feet tall, give or take. Covered in fur darker than shadow, standing in the mist like it had grown out of the fog. Not running, not hiding, just waiting. Solace didn't flinch. She stepped close. They stood less than 10 feet apart. Then both let out this low, breathy sound, like thunder being held in someone's chest. Not angry, not warning, more like recognition. Clay didn't tell me all that. I got bits from what he whispered to Mama behind the porch door. But I heard enough to know he came home changed. That night, he sat real quiet during dinner. His hands were rougher. His eyes kept drifting to the edge of the tree line, like it might move. That same week, I found an old journal under Mama's bed. She hadn't meant for me to see it, but the leather strap had come loose, and the pages practically called to me. Flipping through, I found a line I didn't understand then, but remember word for word now. The wild doesn't ask permission to grow. It just does, and when it does, it takes a piece of you with it. Solace wasn't a baby anymore. She wasn't a girl. She was becoming something that couldn't stay in a backyard, couldn't be called in with dinner bells, or kept close with soft voices. And we all knew it. One night, I couldn't sleep. I grabbed Daddy's tape recorder and crept up to the treehouse. Solace was already there, curled in the shadows, breathing slow. I pressed record and just let it run. I didn't hear anything strange at the time, just her breathing and an occasional twitch of limbs. But the next morning, when I played it back, there was this one part, a sharp, drawn-out rasp, slowed down. It almost sounded like a whisper. Home? Not home? I didn't tell Mama. Not right away. Weeks later, Mama pulled a folded piece of paper out from her Bible and handed it to me. It was a drawing they'd made when I was 6. A scribble of our family. Me, Ezra, Mama, Daddy, and this tall, smiling figure with round eyes and long fingers. Written in crayon at the bottom were the words, "She's ours." Mama had written something beneath it in pen. Sometimes they are. And sometimes they're just borrowing us. I think by then, Mom already knew. Solace wasn't just growing. She was changing. And with every inch taller, every new sound, every look toward the woods, a clock was ticking somewhere in the dark. But she never told me what time it would strike. The morning Solace disappeared, there was no warning, no screams, no broken doors. Just cold toast on my plate and an empty branch outside the window where she'd usually sit watching the sunrise with me. I remember standing there barefoot, the kitchen tiles too cold, and Mama not yet dressed for work. Still in her flannel robe. Daddy was already out by the woodshed, Ezra tying up his boots like nothing was wrong. But I knew. Her absence wasn't quiet. It echoed. Every nail in the walls seemed to loosen without her weight in the air. I ran to the treehouse. The ropes still swung a little. The floor was dry except a faint muddy track near the edge where her foot must have landed. I followed it out to the cedar grove, the one we'd named the listening trees, and stood still. The woods didn't hum like usual. Even the jays were quiet. That hush, like a chapel holding its breath, told me she hadn't just wandered. She'd left, and not of her own choosing. Mama joined me before noon, still wearing her hospital sneakers and carrying a red thermos that had gone cold in her hands. She didn't speak. She just looked around like she was tracing a scent, turning slowly like a compass needle twitching from metal buried beneath the soil. Then she whispered, "Just not out here. Not with fear. Not even with grief. With certainty." And I hated that certainty in her voice. Hated that it meant maybe Solace hadn't gone willingly. In her journal that night, Mama wrote, "The silence is too deep tonight, as if the woods are mourning too." Her smells faded from the blankets. Even Ezra noticed. I told him not to say anything to Maybeth, but the boy's eyes looked hollow. Clay, on the other hand, is pretending it's just a phase. Pretending helps him breathe, I think. I tried pretending, too. Pretended she'd show up around dinner, covered in burrs, stealing biscuits off the counter and acting like nothing happened. But then, 3 days in, we found the scarf. The same red wool one Mama had wrapped her in that first winter. It was tied in a perfect loop, hanging from a high pine limb near Widow's Reach. Too high for me or Ezra to reach. Maybe even too high for Solace. And right beneath it, a single print. Not a shoe, not a boot. Wide, heavy, the toes deep in the wet soil like something had landed, paused, and then taken off again. Mama didn't say a word. She just took the scarf down, folded it slow, and held it to her chest. The pine held her goodbye. I don't believe she'd leave it there unless she knew who'd find it. That's not instinct. That's love. Solace wasn't just borrowing our care. She was answering it, in her way. Clay searched the ridge behind the cattle fence with his rifle slung low. Though he never admitted he was searching for anything at all. He'd say he was checking the traps, or fixing the line, or tracking coyotes. But the way he looked through the brush, eyes darting too fast, too wide. He wasn't tracking a beast. He was chasing guilt, for not building that second bridge to the other treehouse, for not listening closer when Mama said the air felt wrong last week, for letting us believe love could keep her tethered. Ezra found scratch marks along the base of listening cedar, long and shallow like fingernails dragged in a restless dream. Mama said they weren't there the day before. She ran her fingers along them slowly and said nothing. But that night she left the porch light on until dawn. 2 nights later, I heard the sound. It started as wind, or what I thought was wind, rising and falling in the branches. But it shifted, became a voice, or almost a trembling pitch that curled into the shape of a cry. Not a scream, not pain, something older. Call it. I got out of bed, crept past Ezra's door, past the quiet hallway where Mama's bedroom light was still on, and stepped barefoot into the yard. The grass was wet, the air sharp. The sound pulled me to listening cedar, and I swear, for a second I saw her. A shape, not clear, just darker than the dark, sitting at the base of the trunk, knees pulled to chest, hair down, breathing fog into the cold. But when I blinked, it was gone. I'm afraid to believe the sounds are her. I'm afraid not to. I told Clay I want to stay home from the clinic tomorrow. He didn't argue. He's scared too, though he doesn't say it out loud. Men don't cry when something wild leaves, but I do. By the 5th day, her scent was gone from the blankets. The treehouse felt wrong. Still, I climbed up every morning and left a biscuit near the window, just in case. I started writing her letters, folded tight and tied with ribbon, left at the base of the cedar. I don't know why. Maybe I thought something else was watching. Maybe I wanted them to know we were still waiting, that she had people, that she wasn't lost, just missed. The hardest part wasn't not knowing. It was pretending that knowing wouldn't have hurt worse. That if someone told me Solace was taken, or that she'd gone to be with others like her, I'd be okay with either. But the truth is, absence has no shape. It's a vacuum, pulling in every thought and twisting it. That final night before winter came hard, Mama stayed out past midnight. When she came back inside, her shoes were caked in mud, scarf wet with frost. She didn't speak, just sat at the kitchen table, unwrapped the red wool scarf, and laid it out flat like something holy. Then she whispered. I almost didn't catch it. She called from something we'll never understand. And still, she said goodbye. The snow had fallen early that year. Thick and soundless, it blanketed the ridge behind our house like someone trying to hush a memory. Clay said the roads might close by morning, but Mama packed the thermos anyway and left before dawn. She always walked to listening cedar when the season changed. Once in spring, once in fall, and always in winter. She thought I didn't know. But that year I followed. Her footprints were easy to track through the powder. I stayed far enough behind to stay hidden, but close enough to watch her silhouette blur into the tree line, a slow-moving shadow in her long brown coat. Mama stopped near the base of the cedar and crouched low. She didn't pray or talk. She just pressed her palm to the bark and bowed her head like she was listening for something. Only she could hear. A shape lay next to her, a mound of pine needles, darker than the snow damp. At first I thought it was just another nest she'd made for Solace years ago. But then I saw the fur, frozen stiff, stained at the base. Solace was back, not as we remembered her, wild-eyed and curious, humming strange sounds under her breath. But quiet now. Still, curled into herself like a child pretending sleep. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to her, shake her awake, pull her home, and yell that none of this was fair. But Mama didn't move. She just sat beside her and brushed the snow gently off her fur, as if tucking her in one last time. Later, I found the journal entry. It was written days before that morning. I saw the eyes again. Not hers. The others. Watching me from deep in the timberline. I think they let her come back to die here. Or maybe she chose it. Maybe she knew I'd keep the cedar warm. Darlene, December 11th, 1983. I remember thinking how strange it was. How quiet everything had become after that. We didn't hold a funeral. We didn't tell the neighbors. Clay just nailed a loose board back on the fence and went back to fixing up engines like he hadn't wept in the shed that night. Mama stopped making soup. Stopped humming Patsy Cline. She only went out to the cedar, day after day, sometimes sitting for hours until her knees locked up. But something had changed in Solace, too, before she died. A week earlier, I'd found her at the edge of the clearing, eyes glowing in the moonlight, her body thinner than I remembered. Her gaze wasn't wild anymore. It was tired. She didn't come to me, just watched, like she was memorizing the shape of our house one last time. And when I told Mama, she didn't look surprised. She's between worlds now, Mama said quietly that night. It's not just her body leaving us. It's everything she never could say. She showed me. On Solace's wrist, just above the bend of her clawed fingers, there was a mark. Faint. Like a scar made not from injury, but intent. 3 short curved lines, almost like a glyph. Mama had traced it with the tip of her thumb and whispered, "This wasn't carved in pain," she said when Solace lay down at the cedar. There was no noise, no whimper, no resistance, just a breath. And then stillness. That was the night I dreamed of her for the first time since we were kids. In the dream, Solace was standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding one of Mama's blue bowls. She didn't speak, but her mouth moved. And though I couldn't hear the words, I knew what she was saying. I came back so she wouldn't wait. I woke up crying. A few days after we laid her in the cedar's arms, I found something hanging above the kitchen window. It hadn't been there the night before. A small object made of braided fur and thread, shaped like a teardrop. At the center was a piece of the flannel shirt Mama used to wrap her in when she was small. Someone, or something, had hung it there, perfectly centered. Clay said it must have been the wind. But Mama looked at me and said, "She left it to say thank you." That winter, I started recording again. Little things, sounds, breathing. Once, just after midnight, I caught a strange audio signature in the static. Barely there. I slowed it down. It was faint, but it was real. A single word whispered in a voice that wasn't quite human, but wasn't entirely animal either. Mama. I played it for her once. Just once. She smiled, then shut off the recorder, and said nothing. A week later, she hung her coat by the door and never went back to the cedar again. But every Christmas after that, she'd leave a cup of milk on the back porch. Sometimes with a cookie. Sometimes with a folded piece of cloth. She never told us why. We never asked. The last winter, Mama was truly herself. She called me out to the porch. She was standing there in the half-light, coat wrapped tight, holding the old flannel bundle with both hands like it still held warm. The snow had just begun to fall. Fat, slow flakes that spun in place before landing. I remember the smell of wood smoke curling from the chimney behind her, the sound of the screen door creaking and snapping shut behind me. She never really left, did she? I asked. Mama didn't answer. She just placed the bundle on the porch swing and sat beside it. I sat with her. We didn't speak for a long time. That night, I stayed up reading the last pages of her journal. Her handwriting had started to drift, like the words weren't sure they wanted to be written. Grief is like pine sap. You can't wash it off, only carry the scent. The forest doesn't forget. It watches what we do with love we can't keep. After Mama passed, Clay and I cleaned out the attic. It smelled of cedar and thyme. In one corner, hidden beneath a thick wool blanket, we found a small cedar box, hand-carved, its lid burned with the symbol we'd seen on Solace's wrist. Inside were drawings, dozens of them. Some in charcoal, some finger-painted in wild, earthy smears. All of them of us. Our family. Solace beside me, holding my hand. Mama with her back turned, hair blowing like smoke. Clay fixing the fence, all of it from angles we couldn't have seen. Like someone had been watching us quietly for years and remembered every detail. Clay didn't speak. He just touched one of the pages and whispered, "She saw us." For a long time after, I stopped recording. I thought maybe the story ended there, at the cedar, in the snow. But then, 3 weeks after Mama's funeral, I found the stone. It hadn't been there before, placed carefully on the stump where she used to leave tea for Solace. Smooth, gray, with a crude etching scratched along one side. A nest, drawn in lines that spiraled inward, tight and perfect. I didn't cry then, not until I turned it over and saw a single word scratched on the back, so faint it looked like a shadow. Home. It was then I understood. Solace hadn't just come back to die. She came back to say we'd done right by her. That she remembered that even when the world outside called her something else, beast, myth, monster, she knew who held her first. The cedar still stands. I go there now. Not every season like Mama did, but when I need to. Sometimes the snow has already begun to melt. Sometimes the wind carries her name through the branches, not as a voice, but a feeling. Something low in my bones that makes me pause, turn my head, listen. When I sit at the base of that tree, I read the journal aloud. Not just Mama's words, but my own now. I've added pages. I tell her about how the world's changed, how folks now leave out trail cameras and speculate about sightings on YouTube. I tell her how Clay still doesn't believe in spirits, but never once moved the cedar box from the mantel. I tell her about my daughter, how she asks why we leave milk on the porch each December, and how I just smile and say, it's tradition. I tell her I'm trying, and sometimes, on the coldest mornings, there are prints in the snow. Not Solace's, smaller, lighter, newer. She was never ours, but we were hers. And maybe that was enough. Sometimes, love doesn't come with a name. Sometimes, it has no face the world would recognize, no lineage to trace, no language to explain itself. And yet, it leaves fingerprints, in the silence between heartbeats, in the empty spaces we keep returning to without knowing why. It's in the gentle persistence of care, the small rituals we repeat, even when no one's watching, and the ache we carry for things the world tells us never existed. What makes a family is not always blood. It's not even always human. It's a bond born of recognition. When something wild meets something tender, and instead of fear, there's stillness. Instead of retreat, there's return. There are truths too large to fit in books, and moments too fragile to survive in memory alone. But they live in us still, tucked into the folds of our quietest decisions. In the way we forgive without being asked. In the way we stay when no one else does. In the way we love, not because we should, but because we simply can. The forest has always held its secrets, but every so often, it offers one up. Not for answers, but for understanding. Not to explain, but to remind us that the boundaries we build around what is real, what is worth saving, what is capable of love, are much smaller than we think. And maybe that's the lesson, that life isn't only about who we lose, or even who we find, but how we hold what doesn't belong to us, and how we let go when it's time. Because to love something wild is to love with no guarantees, to care for what might one day walk away, or vanish into the fog without a sound. But still, we choose to love, not for control, not for credit, but because something in us remembers what it is to be seen, not as a threat, not as a mistake, but simply as a soul trying to belong. So maybe that's what stays with us. Not the endings, not the facts, but the feeling that even if it was only for a season, something sacred passed through our lives. and we were better for it. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, if it stirred something quiet or long forgotten inside you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and if you'd like to hear more stories like this, tales that live between shadow and light, between belief and memory, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. There's more to tell, and you being here makes all the difference.